All right. The One of the questions that scholars ask while reading this poem is what city or what set of ruins is this referring to? And scholarly consensus is generally that the poem is a meditation on the Roman city of Bath, which is famous for its hot springs, which explains some of the ending of the poem. But one of one of the things that I think is often overlooked in the scholarship of this poem is whether or not this is a reference to an actual city or more the concept of ruin kind of at large. The um the poem does a couple of really interesting things, especially if we look at just the first 5 lines. Well wrought this wall, which is just a statement of quality for the wall. This is a well constructed wall. Weirds broke it. Weirds are the unexplainable. We still have the word weird, of course. We don't use it in quite the same way, where we don't personify the unexplainable through the concept of the weird. Like a weird is not necessarily a thing that enacts damage. Here we have weirds as something unexplainable came along and broke it. This was a well made wall, and now it's broken because the weirds got their hands on it. The stronghold burst. Then, of course, not only do we have weirds broke the wall or weird you breaking in the Old English, but we have the second line is actually broken, right? Like the weirds got to the poem. The weirds broke line two. Line three, we get more of a description of what we've seen. Snapped roof trees, towers fallen. So we've got large constructions collapsing in on themselves. Line four is where we get something a little bit interesting. The work of giants, stonesmiths moldereth. The work of giants. So in Old English, in Middle English, the Romans were often described as giants, especially during this period where uh, the Romans had colonies in the British Isles, in Britannia. So the word giants might potentially be a reference to Romans, which is all very clean and convenient while describing this as the ruin of the city of Bath. The other the other way we could read this, though, and the way that it's not often treated in the scholarship, is not as so strictly historical from a Roman perspective, but leaning into the mythic history of England, where we get people like Geoffrey of Monmouth and some other medieval scholars who give the history of Albion before the Romans came and named it Britannia as being an island populated by none but few giants, echoing the biblical language. So the story of the founding of Britain is that a relative of Aeneas, the hero of the Aeneid, named Brutus, Brutus of Troy, had to leave town, leave the new home in Italy because of some sexual indiscretions with someone's wife. And him and his companions have their own kind of Mediterranean odyssey before ending up on the island of Albion. And when they arrive there, they just see this beautiful, wild um, land that has so much potential for farming and lumber like you wouldn't believe. The problem is the land's not entirely uninhabited, it's inhabited by giants. The eradication of giants, however, is very easily justified. They don't till the land. They don't have textiles. They wear animal skins, so they're very primitive. They Their weapons, um, they don't do anything with metals. They don't even do like cold casting with metal or just kind of beat them into shape. They use clubs, they use like tree branches and trees. So the giants are coded immediately as primitive, and then they are eradicated. And it's okay because there were none but few giants. It's not a massive kind of genocidal campaign. So we end up with this long-standing rivalry between uh, apologies, it's okay, it's just the cat vomiting. We end up with this rivalry between humans and giants embedded in English history. And the first act of English nationalism, or pre English nationalism, or proto English nationalism, is the eradication of the original inhabitants of Albion, the giants. So here, when we have this poem looking back on the history of England, one thing that we have to contend with is this a mythic history or not? When we get lines like the work of giants, are we dealing with large humanoid creatures who have this kind of primitive society and culture, or are we dealing with Romans? And depending on which one we interpret as being the focus of this line, radically changes how we view this ruined city. If if it's the giants, then we're looking at a culture that has been replaced. We're in this case celebrating the ruin. We are looking at this pre-glorious past. If it's the Romans, we're looking at a lost legacy, right? That the English want to be Roman, and they have this very complex relationship with the Romans at this point because the Romans are a colonial power, and they fought tooth and nail for their stake in Britain and eventually gave up on it. They also did things like they built Hadrian's Wall, which which is another major um, colonial landmark that is not in a state of ruin like a lot of the other Roman artifacts. And depending on how we read this, if it's giants, it's a very English history. If it's Romans, then it's an international history. The also the problem of the wall being broken also shows that regardless of the history that is being described, it's a history that is antiquated. The whatever society is being referred to through this line of the giants, they're no longer there. They've been replaced. They're just a vague memory. They're and even the memory itself stands in ruin. That like this wall is brilliantly constructed. It's got these iron rods, which are things, of course, that we use in walls today. But these iron rods help give it strength, and you can see where the stone is crumbling around, and we can see the iron in the inside of the wall. But we're sitting here with our isolated speaker wondering at the construction. Well wrought this wall. Weird's broke it. So it's not even a problem that the weapons, where we've got weapons and files hacking away at the wall over time, and age coming at it. It's the weirds that eventually break the wall. So not only do we not know who built it, we really don't know what destroyed it. This is a poem that spends a lot of time describing what the speaker is seeing, but at the end of the day, it leaves us with more questions than answers. So I'm curious how you read this line about giants. Is this referring to the kind of cultural and economic giants of the Mediterranean, or is this the mythic giants of English history? How did you read this? And after hearing the poem, after reading it, and after getting this far in the video, what are some of your thoughts on the construction and destruction of the wall?